Hello, Pulp Fiction pinball fans. This is Butch Peel with Chicago Gaming Company. Wanted to make this video to take you on a guided tour through the Pulp Fiction Diagnostics system. The limited display capability in Pulp Fiction made Diagnostics a bit of a challenge, but I think we came up with a pretty comprehensive, effective, and user-friendly testing and troubleshooting system for the game. Let me show you. To enter and navigate the game's menu system, which tests are a part of, we use the diagnostic buttons inside the coin door here. A note about the diagnostic buttons label. When you're outside of the menu system, that is, you've simply opened the coin door and started pressing buttons, the buttons perform the functions printed in black. The green button adds service credits to the game, the left and right red buttons adjust the game's volume down and up respectively, and the black button enters the menu system. Which volume you adjust with the red buttons depends upon the state of the game when you open the coin door and press them. If the game is in attract mode volume alone will be changed. If you open the coin door and press the buttons during a game, the gameplay volume alone will change. You can also independently set the gameplay and attract mode volume levels via the System Options menu. Once you press the black button and enter the game's menu system, the 4 diagnostic buttons perform the functions printed in red. The green button escapes out of a menu or menu item. The red buttons move backward or forward through menus and menu items, or change the value of a menu item, and the black button is used to enter a menu or accept the current value of a menu item. Let's give it a test run. Press the black diagnostic button once. The game will immediately jump to the main menu opening page, shown here. The player 3 and 4 displays show the current software revision number and date, respectively. Entering the main menu from attract mode has this effect on the playfield. All feature lamps go out and all general illumination lighting changes from warm white to a brighter, cool white color. Provides much better visibility around the playfield for troubleshooting and testing. Editor's note here, this video is being shot on my Pulp Fiction prototype game. There are a few subtle differences between it and our production games. Actually, the first diagnostics feature of Pulp Fiction is the main menu state itself. Let me explain. The game of pinball is a series of cause and effect encounters between the pinball and a bunch of switches on the playfield, and many of these encounters are pinball interactions with solenoids or kickers triggered by switches. When the ball hits one of these solenoid switches, we expect a very specific and often very violent response. Jet bumpers or slingshots firing and pushing the ball away, or a ball being ejected from a saucer. The game is either not as much fun or can be completely disabled if one or more of the switch-controlled solenoids is not working properly. So we'd like to be able to quickly and easily test them if there's any doubt. And we can do that right here in the main menu state, accessible with a single push of a button. Most importantly, the devices function just as they would during gameplay. The switch solenoid timing is the same, along with the coil kick strength and duration. So if a device works in this mode, it should work fine in a game. And conversely, if it doesn't work during a game, it should exhibit the same failures in this mode. We need a ball, so manually kick one out of the trough. Reach inside the coin door and forcibly push up and hold the main trough ball popper plunger. A ball will magically appear in the shooter lane. Well, maybe after a couple of tries. It's kind of an acquired skill. Leave the ball in the shooter lane and close the coin door. Or pull the high voltage cutoff switch out to the on position. It will click lock in place. The ball will auto-launch to the top of the playfield. Catch it as it rolls back down, but be careful where you put your fingers. Most of the switch-controlled solenoids are now active. Yes, the flippers work, so you can check out playfield shots, as do the slings, the jet bumpers, the top saucer, the roll scene saucer. Even the 2-ball locks will activate their solenoids in series to return the ball to the playfield. Basically, the only place a ball is allowed to sit at rest in this mode is in the main trough. The only coils not active are the main trough eject, the drop targets, the bullseye magnet, and the 2 ball gates up top, and we have specific device tests for all of those. A few general troubleshooting tips for the game. Most coils are powered and triggered directly off of the solenoid wiring harness. Some solder to the harness, others plugged into it by way of connectors. The only exceptions are the 2 ball gates up top and the 4 single drop target retract tube solenoids. Those are powered and triggered from the B and C main under playfield PCBs. The solenoid harness has 2 main trunks that run up the underside of the playfield. That solenoid harness runs all the way back up to the back box, connecting to these solenoid power board drive connectors. So if you're having issues with a coil firing weakly or not at all, check the solder joints at the coil first. Give them a firm tug. Then unplug and reseat any inline connectors. Ensure that the pins are not pushing out the back of the connector. Lastly, reseat the appropriate drive connectors up in the back box. Here's the roll scene single drop target assembly. Its retract coil and opto switch are connected to the main B under playfield PCB. If you have issues of any kind with this assembly, unplug and firmly reseat the connectors at both ends of the cable. Break off any hot glue gun residue with your fingernail. Pull on the connectors, not on the wires. Again, make sure none of the wire pins are backing out of the connector. If the connection feels loose when you reseat it, add a dab of silicone rubber to the point where the connector contacts the header's locking ramp and let it set up overnight. Many other assemblies and such are run off of the 3 main Pulp Fiction under playfield PCBs. General illumination strings, left and right sides. Satellite lamp boards and flashers. Clusters and individual switches. Even optos for the ball troughs and locks. If you have issues with anything that connects to the main under playfield PCBs, suspect the cable, specifically where it connects to the PCB, first. Break off hot glue and reapply a dab of silicone rubber after reseating the connectors, at both ends wherever applicable. Also take a close look at solder joints and give them a good tug. Now let's dive into system tests. Here's what the Pulp Fiction main menu looks like, straight out of the manual. There's the system test submenu. Use the red plus button inside the coin door to navigate to it. There we go. Hit the black coin door button to enter the menu. Here's what the system test menu looks like. I'm going to step through these tests, spending a little extra time on the most useful among them. Reference section 1 of the manual for comprehensive test descriptions and instructions. Let's start with lamp tests. Hit the black button again to enter the lamp test menu. Pressing it once more starts the single lamp test. Use the red plus and minus buttons to step through lighting each lamp in the game, one at a time. Use the black button to toggle between flashing and constant on for the current light. RGB lights are stepped through one color component at a time. Red, then green, then blue. The green button exits the test. The red plus button moves to the all lamps test. The black button starts it up. As the name suggests, all lamps in the game are blinked on and off. Use the black button as a pause button for the blinking. Obviously, my camera does not like this test. Again, escape with the green button. Really quickly, the all 8-bit lamp test simply blinks all RGB lighting controlled by 8-bit ICs on and off. The color test uses the RGB lamps in the game to cycle through all of the various combinations of red, green, and blue color components. Color Adjust is more of a tool, allowing you to experiment with different RGB color and brightness combinations on the playfield, something to do on a rainy day. And 8-bit Reset manually executes a software command to reset the 8-bit RGB control ICs, nothing you need to worry about. Let's move on to switch tests. Escape from lamp tests and move forward one menu. The first switch test is switch edges. This test lets you know when a switch in the game is activated. The player 3 and 4 displays show the switch's description or name. The ball in play display shows the switch number. The game also makes one sound when the switch is closed and another different sound when it opens again. Kind of a tap, double tap sort of thing. Let's try the right out lane, known to the game as switch 30 or the right ball safe switch. Also worthy of note, that outlane switch is a micro switch designed to mechanically click as it closes and opens. Those clicks should coincide precisely with the closed and open sounds in the switch edges test, like this. If they don't, it's time to replace the micro switch. It's becoming unreliable. You can use your finger for those alive or dead tests, but it's always best to run a final test or 3 using a ball. Leaf switches used for slings, jet bumpers, and targets make when the gold contacts on their blades touch. The magnetic switch for the game's spinners uses a Hall effect sensor on a PCB just below the playfield plastic. The switch makes when one pole of the mini magnet on the spinner arm passes over it. This occurs once with each complete revolution of the spinner. Drop target switches in the game make when a target falls. 3 in a row right here. Each drop target switch is a U-shaped opto, an infrared emitter on one side of the U, directly facing the receiver on the opposite side. A fin on the back of each drop target blocks the opto when the target is in the up position. When the target falls, the opto becomes unblocked and the switch is made. When the target is reset or pushed up, the opto switch is blocked again and the switch deactivates or unmakes, if you will. Note the troubleshooting green LED that lights whenever the opto is unblocked. A very handy feature on CGC drop target and trough opto boards. Here's how those LEDs look on the 3-bank drop target PCB. All optos blocked with targets up, unblocked, unblocked, unblocked. Then all reset. Here are the main ball trough LEDs, all on when the optos are unblocked. Then they go off in sequence as 4 balls are dropped into the trough. Back on again, one at a time, as the balls are manually ejected. Let's move on to the next switch test, switch levels. When you enter this test, the displays repeatedly cycle through the list of switches that are currently made in the game, making a drum sound for each one. As with switch edges, each switch description appears in the player 3 and 4 displays. Each switch number appears in the ball in play display. You can see, in this case, I have all 4 balls in the main trough and the roll scene drop target is down. If I also press and hold switch 31, the right in-lane 4 rollover switch, it is added to the list and shows up in numerical switch order. If I were to pop out all of the balls from the trough and push the roll scene drop target up, the game would sit quietly with nothing in the displays until a switch is made to report. As with everything else, press escape to exit. Switch errors is not really a test. It displays the list of switches which have not been made as often as expected, such as one of the shooter lane switches not being made in the last 10 games played. We expect that switch to be made at least once for every ball played. My game seems to be working pretty well. No switch errors. Escape to exit. Let's move on to the coil test. When you enter this test, every coil in the game will fire in sequence, demonstrating reliable software control of all of the mechanisms in the game. For high voltage coils to kick, you must close the coin door or pull the high voltage cutoff switch out to the on position. It'll lock in place. Press the black button once to repeatedly kick a single coil. Use the red plus/minus buttons to move forward or backward one coil. Press the black button again to resume cycling. Keep in mind that these are just rhythmic kicks of the coils. They are not necessarily fired as they would be during a game. Press escape to exit at any time. On to the PWM or pulse width modulation test. Let's keep an eye on the playfield too. It's pretty straightforward. Pulse width modulation is used to completely shut off 5 different strings of game lights. So watch for what's turning off. Right side GI, center GI, left GI, back box GI, and playfield lamps. Oh, and GI stands for general illumination. As with the coil test, use the black button to pause and restart the cycle, and the red buttons to navigate among the 5 lamp strings. And escape, of course, to exit. Let's jump right into sound tests. First up is sound balance. Music and sound effects are played to check balance between the back box and cabinet speakers.
Isn't it more exciting when you don't have permission?
Next is sound channel. You hear my good friend David Thiel speaking from the back box and the cabinet.
Left channel, back box.
Right channel, cabinet.
Next, sound noise. Yeah, no kidding. Here's sound sine wave. Whoa, had to turn that off before my dog ran through the wall. And here's what sound volume test sounds like. Something vaguely familiar about that one. Just to give you a quick idea how the topper test works in my prototype game, the Mia and Vince motors are each cycled through several rotational positions, clockwise, then counterclockwise. The left car headlights turn on when Mia's motor runs. The right car headlights turn on when Vince's motor runs. When Mia is in her home position, facing center, Jack in the sign behind her lights up. When Vince is in the home position, Slim's lights up. No user interaction with this test. Escape exits. Display test is pretty simple. Cycle through numbers, then asterisks, then light all 17 segments of each digit of each display to show that everything is working. As with other tests, use the black button to pause and restart the cycle, and the red buttons to manually step through the test forward or backward when it's paused. Press Escape to exit. Okay, time to dive into device tests. They allow us to test several complex interdependent mechanisms in your game for proper operation. First up, motor tests, specifically the briefcase motor. Use the red plus button to rotate the briefcase counterclockwise and the minus button to rotate clockwise. The motor will stop automatically when it reaches its limits. The briefcase begins the test facing the player in its counterclockwise most position, so the only way to get it to turn initially is to go clockwise. The Player 4 display shows the rotation direction. The Ball in Play display indicates the current rotational position of the briefcase. There are 4 distinct positions dictated by the state of 2 U-shaped opto switches on the briefcase motor assembly under the briefcase molded base. These are switches 18 and 19. Their states are represented in the Player 3 display. An open circle means the opto is unblocked. A filled circle means the opto is blocked. C is the initial closed position, with both optos unblocked. 2 is the approximately 1/3 rotation position, with only switch 19 blocked. 3 is the 2/3 position, with both optos blocked. And 4 is the fully rotated, open and facing Vincent position, with only switch 18 blocked. Hit Escape to return to the Device Test submenu. Hit the black button to step into the topper motor tests. For the topper motors, again, the red plus and minus buttons rotate the figures counterclockwise and clockwise respectively, and the Player 4 display shows the rotation direction. When you're finished testing Mia, hit the black button to test Vince. Okay, on to spinner counts. As the name implies, this test is used to check your spinners out by counting rotations. Left spinner counts in the Player 3 display, right spinner counts in the Player 4. Give each a try by hand and see how they do. Clear the totals with a press of the black button. Close the coin door or pull your high power cutoff switch out and you can test the spinners with flipper shots. Okay, see the spinner, be the spinner. Oh yeah! And please don't ask how many takes that took. 76 spins, not too shabby. Now let's take a close look at the main trough test. When you enter this test, a representation of the main ball trough and shooter lane switches is shown in the Player 3 display. The active coil is indicated in the Player 4 display. In this case, the main ball trough popper. The triangle in the Player 3 display tells you which ball the active coil is set to kick. The switches represented in the test are numbered and their locations indicated on this lower playfield diagram. And here are the corresponding labels for the back box display. Switch 1 is the ball trough jam switch in the throat of the trough assembly. Switches 2 through 5 are the ball trough position switches for balls 1 through 4, respectively. Switch 33 is the auto launch switch at the bottom of the shooter lane. Switch 64 is the upper shooter lane switch. By the way, these switch numbers match the numbers used in switch tests and in the manual. So before we do anything, we can see that the shooter lane switches and the trough jam switch are clear and not stuck on, and it looks like all 4 of the game's balls are sitting in the trough. At this point, we can do a quick and easy check of the trough jam and ball position 1 switches by manipulating the trough popper plunger by hand. Slowly push the plunger up, then let it fall again while watching the state of switches 1 and 2 in the player 3 display. You can see the plunger pushing the first ball up into the throat of the trough, then dropping it back into position 1. This quickly tells you switches 1 and 2 are working well. Back to the device test. The popper is ready to load the first ball into the shooter lane. Let's do that. We need high voltage, so pull out the cutoff switch or close the coin door. Press the game's start button to fire the coil. As the popper kicks the first ball out, there is a very quick blink of the trough jam switch, number 1. It's hard to see sometimes. Then the ball settles in the shooter lane on the auto launch switch, number 33. The auto launch now becomes the active coil. Note the triangle has moved and the player 4 display has changed. The 3 remaining balls in the trough have moved 1 position to the right. No more ball in the switch 5 position. Press the start button again to fire the auto launch coil. Switch 33 clears immediately, and the upper shooter lane switch, number 64, blinks as the launched ball rolls over it. The trough popper becomes the active coil again as the ball rolls down the playfield and back into the trough. When it gets there, it activates switch 5 again. Okay, let's empty out the ball trough. Use the start button to kick out, then launch each of the 4 balls, then catch them before they get back to the trough. This is what the player 3 display should look like with no balls in the trough or shooter lane. That is, completely blank. If either switch 33 or 64 is activated, you likely have a stuck microswitch. If one or more of the 1 through 5 position switches is activated, you have debris of some sort in your trough, or your opto boards are not working properly, usually resulting in balls ending before they should during a game, or 2 balls being served into the shooter lane at one time. It's typically an IR LED on the transmitter PCB that's at fault. But the problem could be as simple as a loose connector. Reseat all 3 connectors on the main trough opto PCB cable, 1 at the transmit board, 1 at the receive board, and 1 at the large A playfield board. Then run through the main trough test again. Drop the balls back into the trough 1 at a time. You should see each ball trigger the 5 through 2 position switches and come to rest. We're back to where we started. Let's move to the subway lock test. As with the main trough test, the player 3 display shows a representation of the switches associated with the subway lock, and the player 4 display shows the active coil. The switches represented in the test are numbered and their locations indicated on this mid-playfield diagram. And here are the corresponding labels for the player 3 display. Switch 10 is the subway entry switch, in the trough directly beneath the pawn shop. Switches 6 through 9 are the subway lock position switches for balls 1 through 4, respectively. Switch 11 is the subway popper switch, located under the Royale with cheese sculpture. Note that the lock switches in the subway trough are laterally reversed when compared to the main and back panel troughs. That is, the balls register left to right in the subway. In the other 2 troughs, they register right to left. This is what the typical startup looks like, blank displays because there are no balls in the lock. If the subway lock is indeed empty, but your player 3 display is registering a ball in any position, you either have debris of some sort in the trough or your optos are not working properly. If the phantom ball is seen in the switch 10 or 11 position, check the solder joints on the appropriate single opto PCBs, then reseat the connector at the other end of the cable and rerun the subway test. If it's in any of the 6 through 9 positions, reseat all 3 connectors on the subway opto PCB cable, 1 at the transmit board, 1 at the receive board, and 1 at the large A playfield board. Then run through the subway test again. If none of these steps make the phantom ball disappear, you likely have a bad IR LED somewhere. Okay, let's see how this test works. Get all 4 balls out of the main trough and hold them in your hand. Knock down the 3 bank drop targets in front of the pawn shop entrance if necessary. Roll the balls 1 at a time into the pawn shop opening. You should see each ball briefly blink switch 10, then trigger the 9 through 6 position switches before coming to rest against the lock up-down post, our now active coil. Again, we need high voltage, so pull out the cutoff switch or close the coin door. Hit the start button to pull in the up-down post and release the first locked ball. It'll roll across the trough and drop into the subway popper. Switch 11 will register as the popper becomes the new active coil. The 3 remaining balls in the lock move forward 1 spot. Hit the start button again to fire the popper and send the ball out through the playfield heads-up gate. The active coil switches back to the lock up-down post. Repeat this process 3 more times to completely clear the subway lock. And we've come full circle. Next up, the back panel lock test. Should sound familiar by now. The Player 3 display shows a representation of the switches associated with the back panel or briefcase lock, and the Player 4 display shows the active coil. The switches represented in this test are numbered and their locations indicated on this upper playfield diagram. And here are the corresponding labels for the Player 3 display. Again, these switch numbers match the numbers used in switch test and in the manual. Switch 12 is the briefcase lock load popper switch under the wire form at the back of the playfield. Switches 13 through 16 are the back panel lock position switches for balls 1 through 4 respectively. Switch 52 is the lock exit switch in the middle of the metal chute alongside the briefcase. This is what the typical startup looks like, blank displays because there are no balls in the lock. If the back panel lock is indeed empty, but your Player 3 display is registering a ball in any position, you either have debris of some sort in the trough or your optos are not working properly. If the phantom ball is seen in the switch 12 position, check the solder joints on the popper's single opto PCBs, then reseat the connector at the other end of the cable and rerun the back panel test. If it's in any of the 13 through 16 positions, reseat all 3 connectors on the back panel opto PCB cable, one at the transmit board, one at the receive board, and one at the B playfield board, then run through the back panel test again. If none of these steps make the phantom ball disappear, you likely have a bad IR LED somewhere. If the phantom ball shows up in the switch 52 position, check the microswitch's wire form to ensure it is not bent or binding in the slot in the metal chute. It should move up and down, or open and close, freely. Okay, on with the test. Get all 4 balls out of the trough and hold them in your hand. Use a ball to knock down the 3 inline drop targets if necessary. Again, we need high voltage, so pull out the cutoff switch or close the coin door. Roll a ball up the lane into the lock load popper. Switch 12 will register as the popper becomes the active coil. Hit the start button to fire the popper and send the ball up into the back panel lock trough. You should see the ball trigger the 16 through 13 position switches before coming to rest against the lock up-down post, our new active coil. We could use the start button to release the ball, but let's load the remaining 3 balls in the lock instead. Roll each ball up into the popper, then hit the start button to load it into the lock. Note that a ball in the popper takes precedent, making the popper the active coil over the lock up-down post. Okay, now let's test our lock release. Hit the start button to pull in the up-down post and release the first locked ball. It'll roll across the trough and down the lock exit chute, briefly blinking switch 52 as it does. The 3 remaining balls in the lock move forward 1 spot. Repeat this process 3 more times to completely clear the back panel lock, ensuring that the switches and the coils perform as expected at each stage. Back to where we started. On to the ball gates test. Those of you who have used the old Williams loop gate tests in games like Medieval Madness or Monster Bash will figure out what we're doing pretty quickly here. Game software needs to be able to control the 2 ball gates at the top of the playfield, allowing balls at certain points in the game to complete full orbits and return to the flippers. That is, not get stopped to drop into the upper saucer or the jet bumpers. In these instances, the rollover switches at the tops of the left and right orbits are used as triggers for the opposite side controlled gate. So left orbit switches control the right side gate and vice versa. The triggered gate lifts and stays up for approximately 2 seconds to allow a fast-moving ball to pass under it and roll back down the opposite orbit. Then it closes again. The switches and gates are represented in the Player 3 display. Here are the switch numbers. Quickly roll a ball up the right orbit. You should see switches 62 and 48 blink in succession as the ball rolls over them. As soon as switch 62 is hit, the left ball gate will open on the playfield and in the Player 3 display. The ball will go underneath it and continue down the left orbit, briefly activating switches 59 and 63 as it does. Switch and gate activations are simply mirrored for balls sent up the left orbit. No high voltage is required for this test unless you'd like to use the flippers to shoot the orbit test shots. Then you'll need to pull out the high voltage cutoff switch or close the coin door. The single drop targets test is next. We need high voltage for this test, so pull out the cutoff switch now. First off, all 4 single drop targets are retracted in succession. Then, beginning with the bottom inline target, each target is reset, pushed up, and then retracted, dropped in sequence. Press the black button to pause the sequence and repeatedly trigger one target. Press it again to resume the cycling. The current target name and the state of its U-shaped opto switch is shown in the Player 3 display. The command being sent to the target is shown in the Player 4 display. The numbers of the coils being fired are shown in the ball and play display. Escape exits. The last device test is the magnet test. As the name implies, this is a quick and easy test to ensure the magnet works when the target trigger switch is activated. The test was not designed to test magnet target shots, so it takes a very deliberate touch on the switch to trigger. We need high voltage for this test, so pull out the cutoff switch now. The state of the magnet target, switch 40, is shown in the Player 3 display. The current magnet state is shown in the Player 4 display. Hold a ball near the magnet pole, then firmly depress the trigger target. The target changes state, the magnet turns on, and the ball is pulled from your hand. After 2 seconds, the magnet shuts off. Like I said, quick test without having to start again. Escape a couple of times to get back to the System Tests menu, and let's take a quick look at Auto Burn-In. Be ready for some chaos. Flashing lights, sound effects, kicking coils, this test has it all. For maximum effect, pull the high power cutoff switch out and install a shaker motor. It's quite a calamity. Really makes you appreciate peace and quiet. And here it is, the last system test. Empty balls. All of you old Bally Williams folks will recognize it. Not really a test, just a quick automated method for kicking all of the balls out of the main trough and physical locks. You need high voltage, so pull out the cutoff switch or close the coin door. Catch the balls as they are ejected onto the playfield for easy removal. Escape when you're done. And that, as they say, is a wrap. Hope you found this video helpful. Until next time, stay out of trouble, you crazy kids.